Welcome to another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. He is the legendino, Tim Vickery. He's in Rio, and to have a conversation not just about a iconic football match, and believe me, today's is a cracker, not just to talk about an iconic football match, but also to joust with me about the pop music of the day, just to let you know what's going on, Tim.
Yeah, but if we're talking pop music, then we are in the presence of broadcasting royalty. You can feel it all over. Sir Duke is in the house. Dotun and Tim, how are you, mate?
I'm very well, thanks very much. Not just Sir Duke, Sir Andy Dawson is in the house with us today to talk about one of the great FA Cup finals ever. Andy, how are you doing? You all right?
I'm very good. Thank you very much. Thanks for knighting me there, Sir Andy Dawson. I'll take that.
I got Sir Duke, so I got two honours in just one title.
But you're like a bit self-proclaimed. It's a bit like Napoleon putting the crown on his own head.
God, Tim, that was so harsh. That was so harsh. That was so harsh. You don't know how deep that cut. But let's leave that aside for now. Andy, I am self-proclaimed apparently, but clearly from your accent, you proclaim your background straight away and your affinity maybe as well.
Well, yeah, I don't want to give away the match that we're talking about just yet. That's for you to do. But yeah, I'm a Sunderland fan, have been since birth, I suppose, which we'll discuss a bit later in the timeline of this match that we're going to talk about. There's a photograph that exists of me, age 3, wearing a Sunderland kit, which is probably for a 6-year-old. It's hugely oversized, but yeah, Sunderland for life.
Yeah, and I should say as well, because I know this now, never mistake a Mackham for a Geordie.
Never do that. No, that's a big mistake. Yeah.
Well, do you know, Dotun?
12 miles between us.
We'll get to the charts on this day later on. The day in question is the 5th of May of 1973. But one act that was in the charts, Geordie.
Oh yeah.
Wearing a Newcastle shirt, the fella who's a heavy metal screamer and he went on to, I think, AC/DC or something like that, you know. But so it's a northeast takeover, isn't it, on the 5th of May 1973?
Well spotted. I'd forgotten all about Geordie, but well spotted.
Well done for forgetting all about Geordie.
What does it mean then, Andy? What does it mean for Sunderland? I mean, we'll go back to 5th of May in just a moment. What does it mean for Sunderland fans that you did the almost imaginable against one of the giants at the time of English football? You did it on the Wembley pitch when, as one commentator said, nobody gives Sunderland a chance to win this match.
Well, this was it. I mean, it was a huge upset at the time because we'd started that season really badly, and we just kind of got better and better as the season went on. In the second division, I should say, in case people don't know, we're talking about the 73 Cup final where we beat Leeds United 1-0. And Leeds were the dominant team of the early part of the 70s. There's no doubt about it. So it was kind of like Manchester City of now, playing against, maybe let's say Middlesbrough, who are on the brink of the playoffs.
It's even better, I think, than that for Sunderland, because the team that you beat in the semi-finals was Arsenal.
Yeah.
And Arsenal that year, I think people have forgotten this because, you know, Arsenal had done the double in 70-71. Mm-hmm. They were serious contenders to do the double again. They were near the top of the league, and then in the FA Cup semi-final.
And we beat Manchester City in the 5th round as well. So we didn't do it the easy way. We didn't get there by any sort of luck of the draw stuff. It was. I've got to say, I was 10 months old on the 5th of May 1973. I've no memory whatsoever of the match, but it's gone into folklore as a Sunderland fan. Partly because it was such an incredible upset and an incredible result on the day. Partly because we've never won at Wembley since 1973 until a couple of weeks ago. We've had 8 attempts on the Wembley turf, and we finally broke that hoodoo a couple of weeks ago with the Papa John's Trophy final, no less. So I think that's partly why it's kind of stuck in our folklore, because we've done nothing really of note ever since. which is, I mean, you refer to Newcastle there. I always say it's disgraceful that Sunderland and Newcastle haven't won anything since 1973, because Newcastle have been to Wembley a few times and not won anything, because the support for football in the region is just so fevered and frenzied when either team are doing well. It's just such a tragic waste that neither team has done all that well in recent years. I know Newcastle had their sort of spell in the sunlight with Kevin Keegan, but I mean, you're looking at 25 years ago when that happened.
You've got to throw Middlesbrough into that mix, though, don't you?
No, we don't count Middlesbrough. No, don't count Middlesbrough. As Middlesbrough get caught, they're just a small team in Yorkshire.
Well, the tradition of these clubs is unbelievable, isn't it? And people forget. And Sunderland were like the Bank of England club or something. They were a huge thing, and the region produces so many players, or produced. I don't know if that's still the case. Why do you think that these clubs have punched below their weight for so long?
I think it's just bad management, pure and simple. I mean, Newcastle now have had Mike Ashley there for 14 years, I think, and that's a long, long time. And I was just thinking, because Sunderland have just got a new owner who is a 23-year-old. He's the son of the guy who used to run Marseille. He's Swiss French.
Okay, Swiss French.
A gentleman of Europe, and his mother's Russian, and his dad was French, I think. And he's Kirill Louis Dreyfus, and he's 23, and he's got a few quid in the bank apparently. And as I said, his dad used to be chairman of Marseille, so he's grown up around successful football clubs, and he's done his homework, and he's in this for the long haul. Apparently, he's serious about it, and it just got me thinking that all the time I've been a Sunderland fan, I can only think of about 18 months when we've had ownership by someone with a bit of money and the wherewithal to actually do the right thing with it, which was when Niall Quinn got a consortium together about 14 years ago. Yeah. He was around for 18 months, and then we were bought out by an American billionaire, Ellis Short, who had no idea. He had the money, but he had no idea how to run a football club. And I just thought that in all the 48 years since I was born, we've never had anybody who's had A, the money, and B, the capability to run a football club properly. We've always done it on the cheap, or we've always done it wildly badly. So this could be the beginning of a new dawn. But then football fans always say that, don't we?
That consortium that you mentioned with Niall Quinn, I remember him announcing that actually that he was going to be part of this consortium, and it did seem as if it would bring in a kind of a renaissance for the way that football clubs are run, almost to a certain extent on the sort of German fan model kind of thing. Yeah. It did for a moment, at least that's what it seemed like. Why didn't that work?
Well, the consortium was mostly made up of Irish associates of Niall. Some of them were racehorse owners, some of them were Irish businessmen and builders. And basically what happened was the economic crash in Ireland kind of put paid to the plans that they had. They couldn't continue to go ahead with it. And this was kind of like about 2009, I think. So we ended up selling it to the billionaire. But on paper, yeah, it did look as if that was going to be something for the long haul, which would have been to the benefit of the club. But it was kind of, and he brought in Roy Keane as well to add to the Irish connection. And we had a couple of great years with Roy Keane as manager. But then it all went a bit wrong again, as it does.
Isn't it a tragedy that clubs of this size are kind of dependent on the economic caprices and whims of multi-millionaires and so on? Can you tell? Because I've never been to Sunderland. I went to Newcastle once in December, and I cried with cold. And I don't cry easy, It was just, but how is the football club interwoven with the industrial history of Sunderland? Well, and how has it suffered, the club, from the decline of industry in Sunderland?
Well, I mean, the stadium itself, the Stadium of Light, is built on the old Wearmouth Colliery. So it's built on the old mine that closed down at the end of the 80s, I think, early 90s. So there's that physical connection with the industrial history. But it's a different world now, because they always used to say, and I'm sure they say this about clubs in other parts of the country, it's not unique to Sunderland or Newcastle, but they'd always say if the team won on a Saturday, productivity would be right up on a Monday. So there was that. It's a kind of place where it was always the proper working class game, because we had the mines and we had the shipyards was the two main employers. So the men, because it was 95%, 99% men that went to the matches. The men worked hard all week, and then they had their football at the weekend. But obviously that's all changed now. So we're in the modern world with all the other clubs. But I mean, we've got the Stadium of Light, which is the 7th largest ground in England, and we're still flailing around in League One. So you've got no club's got a divine right to be anywhere in the league pyramid, but it's a crying shame that through bad management for the last few years, that's where we are now. So hopefully, matey boy, 23-year-old billionaire, whatever he is, can turn that around for us.
I feel your pain.
You were in. Go on.
I was going to say I feel your pain, because I'm a Charlton supporter, so you can imagine that we've been through not too dissimilar things at all. But you said something earlier on when we were talking about the route to Wembley, beating Manchester City, beating Arsenal, and so on. You said, we didn't get there the easy way, I think.
Yeah,
you said. So how did you get there? How, when you look back on it now, and taking in all the sort of folklore and what not around it, how do you think that a second division team, which was the second tier in English football in those days, a second division team overturned literally one of the top 4 at least of the first division, the top tier?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think those 2 matches against Manchester City, that went to a replay. We beat them at home in the replay. And then the Arsenal semi-final probably contributed to that run, because if we hadn't had those tough matches, if we'd had, for example, an easy run to the final, we might have just got turned over on the day of the final, because we hadn't put ourselves up against the very top clubs that Arsenal and Man City were at the time. It's a fairy tale story almost, because the manager, Bob Stokoe, came in around about November or December, I think, of that season. And we'd had a rough start of the season. I think we were 19th in the second division when Stokoe came in. And he made a couple of signings, nothing major. And the club just went on that kind of that run that clubs can do sometimes. That momentum began to build gradually. And then you get that kind of cup fever that takes over when you do a couple of giant killings. And I think we only lost something like 5 in 32 under Bob Stokoe. So the players were just bog standard players, although 2 of them did go on to play for England later on and went and played in other clubs when we were still in the second division. But they just got that kind of belief in the team as a whole. And it just, it began to snowball gradually. And I think, I can't remember who it was, but on the day of the final on the TV coverage, it might have been Brian Clough, but he was just ex-Sunderland player anyway. And I think he predicted that Sunderland would win it.
He hated Don Revie, didn't he? They
well, there was that as well.
Didn't get on. I remember this. I mean, because there aren't many times in life when you think it's an advantage to be a few years older than Andy Dawson. But this, for me, is one of them, because I was just short of my 8th birthday. Right. And, the age where you're kicking every ball and, the TV coverage goes on all day. And one of the things I vividly remember from the build-up is, because, and Leeds were just going to walk the floor with them.
Yeah.
No second division side had won the FA Cup since 1931. And Leeds were a top first division club. They were, this is a magnificent side. A side that with 1 or 2 changes, 2 years later, were very close to being champions of Europe. They were a magnificent side. And before part of the build-up, you've got the cameras with the players and so on. And before the match, in the hotel, there's an interview with the Leeds players, and they're all sitting and they're all in their blazers and they're all looking very formal, and there's no smiles. And they're looking like condemned men. It's really, really serious. And then Sunderland, they're having a laugh.
Yeah.
And my mum, who's no football expert, I remember watching it with her, and she's saying, I think Sunderland are going to win. You know, I've following her tips has cost me a fortune since then. But she was bang on then. But the difference in the emotional state of the two teams was extraordinary. That Leeds team, they were a great team, but they were difficult to love, weren't they? There was a coldness about them. And the Sunderland team, I know that it's one of the big FA Cup final cliches, but, you know, enjoy the day and so on. But they were clearly having the time of their lives.
That was it. I mean, it was a free hit for the Sunderland team because nothing was expected of us, so they could go there and enjoy the day. And I'm sure that was how Bob Stockwell got them drilled for it all. You know, have a laugh, enjoy your day. And it was the same for the fans. Enjoy your day at Wembley, and whatever happens will happen. And I've not seen that footage, but I can well imagine that would be the case, because Leeds will have been worried. They'll have been worried that we'd beaten Arsenal and Manchester City on the way there, so they wouldn't have underestimated us. But it was it's quite weird, because you said that no second division team had won it since 31. And then Southampton won it in 76 and West Ham won it in 1980 from the second division. But those matches don't seem to get celebrated or remembered quite as much as the 73 one does. For whatever
my mum
reason.
Remembers 76 because she's a Southampton fan, so she remembers that one. But she didn't bet on Southampton that day. So
you see, I don't have the clear 2020 futuristic vision of Tim's mum, but what the point when I knew or thought Sunderland are going to win this is when, and I've only seen this, I remember, actually, the one thing I remember about the match was Bob Stokoe's celebration at the end, because, you know, I don't know if I remembered it from the day, because I'd have been about 13. I don't know if I remembered it from the day or whether I've remembered it just because it's been shown over and over and over and over and over again on the television. But the one point, looking back on it, when I thought, Sunderland are going to win this, is when the teams march out onto the Wembley pitch and both managers are there. Don Revie is there to the left as they walk on, and Bob Stokoe is there to the right as they walk on. I mean, quite apart from the demeanour of the players, because again, like if you look, the Leeds players look a little bit more tense, particularly Billy Bremner, which was a surprise to me, and who's the Leeds captain coming out with the ball. But if you look at apart from the demeanour of the players, the two managers, Don Revie dressed in a dark suit as if he was going to a business meeting.
Yeah.
Bob Stokoe in a red tracksuit, top and bottom, as if he was there to win a game. That's the point.
I've only just found out that it was red because, you know, we had black and white at the time. I had no idea. It was horrible, garish red. But it's funny you mentioned Bob Stokoe and his dress, because he walks around with an hat on, as you're doing at the moment, Dotun.
But he has to.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, and I remember thinking, you know, as you do when you're nearly 8, he was like the oldest man I'd ever seen. You know, when he was running on, at the end when he ran on to celebrate. I just thought he was about 80 or something like that. I was like, he was 42. He was a comparatively young man.
That's what management does to you, though.
Indeed.
You can't give him his dues there.
That's what people looked like back then, though, wasn't it? Everyone was 15 years older than they really were. But yeah, he had his red tracksuit on and his kind of tan belted Mac that he was wearing as well. And it was a sartorial nightmare, but it just adds to the beauty of it all, I think, when you see him running at the end, kind of holding onto his hat so it doesn't fly off, running towards Jimmy Montgomery and all the other players.
He looks like a garish extra from Bugsy Malone, doesn't he?
Yeah. Well, actually, there's a statue outside the Stadium of Light now of Bob Stokoe doing that kind of skipping run that he did. It's kind of mid-run, but he looks like the child catcher. The stance that they've got him outside the stadium, it looks like he's running to try and catch your kids or something. But
that's the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang reference.
Yeah,
first one. Yeah, well done there. Okay, let's talk about this match. You're listening to the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, and as always, we look at an iconic match and try and look back at the match itself, but also to put it into its social context of the time, and not least with the musical soundtrack of the time as well. So we're talking 5th of May, 1973. The the UDI crisis, Unilateral Declaration of Independence crisis of Rhodesia. It makes the front page of the newspapers. It's a Saturday. Leeds versus Sunderland, although I ought to really say it the other way around, at Wembley. And it's an amazing match to start off with. Not because the first half is too pretty, but because there I think you've already seen the drama of the way the players are thinking about this. Sunderland look like they're really up for it, and they give Leeds a go from the very beginning.
I think that's so important, because I would imagine, your big fear as a Sunderland fan is, God, we're going to get humiliated. And the first few minutes make it clear that you're not going to get humiliated.
Well, I was going to say a tackle. There's an assault in the first 90 seconds by Richie Pitt on Alan Clark, which nowadays would be straight red. Yeah. And the police would probably be involved. But back then, it was that's what they call a reducer, I suppose, putting down a marker. But Richie Pitt just absolutely takes out Alan Clark in the first 90 seconds. And Clark's rolling around on the ground. And it's kind of like, we're here to compete. We're not going to be, we're not going to roll over and be beaten today. And I love watching that challenge, because it's one of those things. It's from football's bygone era. Like I said, it wouldn't be allowed in any way, shape or form anymore, but it's just
I think
such fun to watch.
I think it affected Alan Clark, because he is the ultimate centre forward, or was at that time the ultimate centre forward, and he barely got a sniff of the ball during the rest of the game. You think, where's Alan Clark? And I think it affected him, actually. So if that was an intentional marker as a sort of a tactic, it worked for those days, definitely. As you say. There's also some VAR, on retrospect, VAR demanding situations, one or two that we might come on to later on. But certainly if VAR was in effect in 1973, Sunderland might not have won this. And I'm not taking anything away from the victory. You've got to play to what's available at your time. But would you agree with that?
No comment. I can't agree with a hypothesis like that.
Okay, apologies. Let me leave that around. Well, there should have been a VAR inquiry on the brilliant save it turned out to be by the goalkeeper off an attempt by, was it Peter Lorimer, I think it was, that he hits it onto the crossbar. But it was a typical sort of England 1966 moment there. Yeah. I actually think you got it, but I think it would have been open to a consideration by VAR in today's time.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely been checked,
Watching it on ITV, Brian Moore and Jimmy Hill, they didn't know what had happened. They had to go through the replays, and even they're thinking, has it hit the back of the staunch, and come back? And that shows just how extraordinary a save it was from Jim Montgomery. A double save. He blocks the header from Trevor Cherry, and then he has to react very quickly to block Lorimer. But it happened so quickly, that it needed a couple of replays for them to work out what had happened.
Yeah, I'd only been familiar with the BBC coverage until fairly recently, and I saw the ITV coverage that you've just mentioned there on, must be YouTube or something. They were completely baffled by what had happened, and had it gone in, had it not crossed the line, and it was like you say, total confusion. But hindsight, you kind of know what happened from watching it over and over again over the years. But incredible save though. Absolutely incredible, and double save, like you said, just completely instinctive. And it was at that point, I think, when Leeds realised this isn't our day, because that was probably about 70 minutes, 65, 70 minutes, and I think. And Leeds in the second half, as you said before there, the first half wasn't a spectacle. We got the goal on 31 minutes, but then the second half, Leeds just threw the kitchen sink at us.
Yeah, and it was one of those Belfast kitchen sinks as well that they're throwing at you.
And just going back to the goal, because the goal happens in a first. Watching that again, it's different from it's strange the way your memory plays tricks with you, because I remembered it being from further out, and it's not. It's from around the penalty spot, isn't it? It's a corner melee, and it falls for for dear old Ian Porterfield, who's no longer with us. But in my memory, it was from the edge. It was a blast from the edge of the area, but it wasn't. It was from much closer.
Yeah, he just hooked it in. It just fell just perfectly for him, and he hooked it in. And again, like you said, just a scramble about in the penalty area. Corner came in, header went down, and then Porterfield was just right place, right time. And obviously that will have. I'm not saying this from memory because, as I say, I was 10 months old, but that will have just completely invigorated the Sunderland fans that were there on the day. You know,
he was a classy player, wasn't he?
Yeah, I was about to say he had a couple of other chances in that final as well, which were, you know, not converted, but really well taken.
Well, there's some good players in the side,
some really good players.
And and to me, it shows how then the talent was more widely distributed around the clubs.
Yeah, I think so. It was kind of we had players, Jimmy Montgomery in goal there that you mentioned. And Porterfield, and then Dave Watson.
Dave Watson was a magnificent centre half. You know, an old-fashioned stopper centre half who went on to play for England for years and years.
Exactly.
He was really unlucky that England missed out on the '78 World Cup, and '82 he's just too old. He's just lost it. Yeah, and so he doesn't go, and Terry Butcher goes and builds a career. But had that been 2 years earlier, Dave Watson would have been England's World Cup centre half. He was a magnificent stopper centre half, and obviously Dennis Stewart as well. Yeah,
players like that shouldn't have been plying their trade in the second division, I guess. But as you say, I mean, I like to watch the old episodes of the Big Match Revisited on ITV4 from the mid-70s, and there's a lot of coverage gets given to the second division. And it's kind of treated almost on a more equal level than it is today. So I think the culture was different.
What this tells me is that it's fine margins between players in the top two divisions, certainly. The difference between a second tier player and a Premier League player is not a huge amount at all. So then if that's the case, what does it come down to? Physical fitness is one thing, because obviously Premier League is a faster game. Not necessarily all the time, actually. Let me take that one back. But physical fitness is part of it. And you can see, can't you, as the players come out, the Leeds players, even though they are a little bit sort of their time, a little bit stocky and bulky in places, but they do look like the thoroughbreds in comparison when Sunderland come out. And that's no disrespect to Sunderland either. Obviously, you know, somebody of my girth can't be complaining about what Sunderland look like, but you can tell that there is really a difference in their physique.
Well, they look like normal blokes, don't they?
Well, yeah, exactly. Going down the pub or whatever it might be.
Yeah, you wouldn't have been surprised if a couple of the Sunderland players had been having a bit of a smoke in the tunnel before they went out. You know what I mean?
I didn't want to say, but feel free to lob one of those in.
Do they smirk tabs? Is that the local vernacular? Yeah, I got that off Harry Enfield's Northeastern character.
Just before an FA Cup final, right.
Smirking a tab, yeah.
But if it's not the physique, then what is it that makes the difference, the slight difference? In this match, for example, you mentioned the goalie, Sunderland goalie, absolutely phenomenal save. Definitely the save of the match. Arguably the moment of the match, or do we have to go to Porterfield's goal for the moment of the match?
I think it's Jimmy Montgomery.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the goal had obviously put a marker down, and you know we were 1-0 up, but then as I said, Leeds through the kitchen sink of the second half, and it was that save is I hate to use the word iconic, but that's what it was. That was the moment where
if that goes in, Leeds win.
Oh yeah, because they were putting such pressure on us that if they'd scored, then it would have probably finished 3-1 or something to Leeds.
Or they win a replay.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you know
replays back then.
Yeah, when there's a replay, when it's over 2 games, the better side usually wins. You know, and Leeds were the better side than Sunderland.
Having said that, there's a couple of moments towards the end of the match when Leeds were obviously piling forward, and we broke away a couple of times and could have got a second goal, which doesn't really get remembered very much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't buy this, the better side, though, Tim. Leeds, how can you say that when Sunderland won? You know, the phrase that coaches often use, even more increasingly nowadays, is, you know, we were the better side, but we didn't win. But hang on,
well, Leeds are at the top of the first division, and
no,
Sunderland
but on the day,
are in the second. No, on the day, Sunderland deserve it.
This is what I'm saying.
But
On the
if you're
better
going to play
side,
if you're going to play those two sides 3 times, Leeds are going to win 2 out of the 3.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
fair point.
I mean,
fair point.
on paper, there was no contest, was there? On paper, there was no contest. But on the day, football's not just about scoring goals, it's about defending as well. And it's about teamwork and the whole aspect of everything. And on the day, Sunderland did enough right to win the game.
And to be fair, the coach, the manager, as he would have been at that time, Bob Stoker, did run straight to Montgomery after the match. Made a beeline for the goalkeeper because he realised what you've just said, that it was the keeper that won it for us. Okay, from a Leeds perspective, Tim, what did they do wrong? What didn't they do right?
Well, they clearly did. They didn't impose themselves on the game in the first half, did they? Didn't. I mean, as we're saying, they threw the kitchen sink in the second half. But I think in a game like this, when you're up against an opponent who theoretically should be outgunned, you want to make that superiority clear right from the start. You want to stamp your foot on their neck. You're not getting out of your own half. This is our game. This is our pitch. You don't deserve to be here with us. They never did that. The fluency in their passing is not good enough. They just don't turn up.
That was the hallmark. Sorry, that was the hallmark of that Leeds side, wasn't it? They would dominate matches and they would stand on your neck, and that was it. And you're not going to be beaten. We will beat you. We'll obviously, they were a skillful team, but they were also a hard team and an aggressive team.
I remember Eamon Dunphy writing
all
about
of those things.
And Eamon Dunphy would say, you just can't take a throw on against them.
Yeah.
Because, you got a throw on and they've got everyone is marked. You can't, I think he wrote in Only a Game, theoretically, you have won a throw on. But you just don't have any option. They're strangling you.
Yeah.
It feels you might as well just give them the ball and let them get on with it. They were really, really hard to play against. But I don't know, maybe because they're in the hunt for league honours as well. Maybe they were a little bit tired at the end of the day, at the end of the season. I don't know. Shouldn't have been a factor because it's a wretched cold day, isn't it? I mean, some FA Cup finals are played in blazing early May heat. This one, Bob Stoker and his coaching staff, they've got a blanket over them. It's so cold. They're from Sunderland, for crying out loud. They've got a blanket over them.
Yeah, they should be sat there in T-shirts.
Yes.
That's not an exaggeration, by the way, because I was in Newcastle on a New Year's Eve where it started snowing. It literally thick snow within about half an hour, and everything was white. Hardly anybody out on the streets except for a few sort of people who insisted on getting drunk and rolling around in the sno. And
do you think Newcastle fans wanted you to win? Is there that northeast rivalry, or is it?
I think a lot of them probably might have done, because the rivalry between the two clubs was never as fierce then, I don't think, as it is now. You would get a lot of people who would go and watch both teams.
Yeah.
Depending on which team was at home, because obviously they rotated weekend to weekend.
That's the way that football used to be with Man City and Man United fans. Yeah. And it depresses me that as time goes on, it kind of builds up more and more rivalry and more hatred. That worries me a little bit.
There was a particularly nasty playoff semi-final in the second division in 1990, and I think that escalated the rivalry. But
there's always a game, isn't there?
It's pathetic, really. Do you know what I mean? As I said at the beginning, both clubs have been treated really badly and ran really badly for so long, and I'd love to see a Tyne-Wear derby up at the top end of the Premier League every season. That would just be so thrilling for everyone, for that rivalry to be, at the top end of the league as opposed to where they both are now. I mean, we might play each other next season in the Championship, the way things are looking at the minute, which is just ridiculous. But there you go. That's where we are.
Just going back to the tactics or the lack of tactics of Leeds, whichever it is, could that have been a tactical move, Tim, that the Don Revie said, look, we're the athletes here, or we're the superior athletes here. Let them tire themselves out running around in the first half, and on that Wembley pitch that everybody knows sags every sinew of energy from you. And I was thinking about that as I saw the Leeds players just sink to their knees on the Wembley pitch after the match, once the full-time whistle had been blown. It's only at Wembley, or it's only on those international matches that you see people actually sink to their knees in that way. You don't see it in sort of normal Premier League matches or any other divisions matches. So it does tap away your energy in some way. I wonder if that could have been part of the strategy.
But that's not the properties of the ground. People always used to talk about the properties of the Wembley turf.
But it's bigger, isn't it? It's a bigger pitch. Is it psychological?
It's a little bit, but it's psychological because it
is bigger.
What
it's
the
wider.
FA Cup used to be, and the build-up that starts. It's the only game, the only club game you're going to get on TV, and the build-up starts, and the build-up is relentless. And they're giving interviews, and they're getting measured for special suits and so on. And there's this huge thing about it. And psychologically, I think that's really, really draining. And that's the main reason that come the end of FA Cup finals, people were lying across with cramp all over the place. It doesn't happen so much now in FA Cup finals because the game doesn't have the same.
But at the end of this,
cachet.
I
think part of the problem here is Leeds aren't up for it sufficiently.
But at the end of the match, clearly Sunderland, even though they managed to keep the ball at bay, they're the team that looks the most knackered. At the end, would you agree with that? I'm not sure.
Well, defending is very, very tiring, isn't it?
Andy, would you agree with that?
Well, did Sunderland look more knackered or Leeds?
Yeah, at the end.
Yeah, I think so. But then again, it's that we didn't have the same training and conditioning that Leeds had because Don Revie was so thorough in everything he did preparation-wise. And again, we were just this ramshackle group of players that had got a bit of momentum and won the cup matches on the way against City and Arsenal. So, but I think it's that thing where adrenaline just takes over. But by the end of it, I think both teams were just spent because they thrown everything into it. And I think Leeds possibly didn't so much have an off day, but I just think they were taken by surprise a little bit. And it kind of goes back to that first challenge by Richie Pitt on Alan Clark, which, as I said, horrible, horrific, graphic violence, but fun to watch. And it was kind of just stuff like that just set the tone of the match. And it was kind of, we're not going to be rolled over and beaten here. And maybe Leeds thought they were going to just do it, quite easily, quite comfortably. But then they faced a team with a bit more bite than they expected, I guess.
Okay, it's impeach the president time. On the front pages of the papers on that day, Saturday, 5th of May, Nixon sets limits to evidence on Watergate links. President Nixon acted quickly today to prevent any further embarrassing leaks of information by his present or former aides giving evidence to any of the Watergate investigators. It's funny in retrospect. It's hilarious in retrospect. That's the backdrop to this match. Do you remember, I'll let you off on this one just for now, Andy, but we'll come back to you in just a moment. Tim, you were 8 years old. Do you remember what was in the charts at the time?
Oh, yeah.
Apart from Geordie.
I remember almost all of it. Almost all of it.
Me too.
We're probably going to disagree because I didn't... you just click with certain eras. And mid-60s has always I've just got it. It just clicked with me. This stuff that was around now, I was completely nonplussed by most of it. And just not only by how it sounded, but also how they looked. And kitsch has just gone mad. Glam rock has gone absolutely mad. But just to link it in with Watergate, we can transition from the politics to the music. One thing that I think comes really strong out of the States at that time is that kind of paranoia air in the music that Norman Whitfield did really, really well. It's the Norman Whitfield records he did with the Temptations, or Smiling Faces sometimes with the Undisputed Truth. It's just a fantastic Watergate era paranoia record. And for me, here we're going to disagree, There's only one great record in the top 10, and it's an English band who they've got a little bit of that Norman Whitfield strings going on. And for me, it's the greatest thing that they ever did, because they became a kind of lightweight pop band. It's Hot Chocolate and Brother Louie, which is, I think it's just a fantastic song about multiracial love. And it's just got this Norman Whitfield-esque Watergate air of menace in the strings. That's the one I loved at the time. And looking back, it's still the one from the charts of that time that I think, yeah, that's the one I'm still happy to listen to.
You see, you're 100% right about what you've just said about Hot Chocolate. 100% right. Apart from, so you can't be 100% right. Apart from the bit where you said they went on to be, kind of like a pop band afterwards, because I think in Brother Louie, you can hear the Hot Chocolate sound. This is, you're right, You Sexy Thing is going to be a much more commercial product than something like Brother Louie.
Yeah, see, the problem for me was that after this, everyone wasn't a winner.
What about you, Andy?
UFOs.
Andy, what about you? Do you feel any of the music in the charts?
I mean, I'm just looking down the chart now. I love a lot of this stuff. David Bowie, Driving Saturday, number 3. The Sweet, Wizard, loads of the glam rock stuff's fantastic and still sounds really good. Roxy music there, Pajama Rama, early period.
Right, can you explain? Because on Brian Ferry is northeast lad.
Yeah.
But a lot of this is just really kitsch and sweet and so on. It's played for laughs. Wizard, what's Roy Wood doing to himself, for crying out loud? These are the Brummy Beatles with the move. On. It's great. And what's he doing? No, this everyone has just got ridiculous.
He's just making pop records, Tim. Leave him alone.
He was an artist.
That's pop music.
And also the reason why I agree with you, See My Baby Jive was a load of rubbish. But before that, the track that comes before that in that trajectory from the move to Wizard is called Ballpark Incident. It's an old school 50s rock and roll type of song.
A lot of this stuff had that as a base, didn't it?
Exactly.
Old 50s rock and roll.
But he gets it, he really takes it forward. Ballpark Incident is an amazing track.
Isn't that the indication that he was so much better than the trash that they were putting out, that he was putting out?
But clearly somebody in the record company was saying, if you do this movement, pointing with one finger at your audience, moving that finger forwards and backwards, it'll catch on. And he thought, go on then, I'll do it for a laugh. And he gets to number 1. See My Baby Jive was number 1 for the most amount of time, about 3-4 weeks, I think it was.
It was, yeah.
Yeah,
it was huge.
But
I mean, the kind of serious stuff. I mean, I don't get Bowie, and I'm still waiting to get one of these days. You're gonna explain. And this one, Driving Saturday, is just dull, isn't it? Dull. But Roxy music, I want to get you on, Andy, because I've just never got it. Don't understand it. I don't connect with it. There's supposed to be some kind of concept, some kind of big concept going in. It's very, very high-flying intellectual stuff. And the only concept I can seem to get from it is that Brian Ferry looks good but can't sing a note. And what am I missing?
Well, I think what it is, it's that whole art school thing. Obviously Ferry went to art school. And,
but the 60s art school stuff, I love.
Yeah.
I love
but then you can't just repeat what happened in the 60s. It's trying to,
obviously,
it's using the new technology. Eno's there with his swirly synthesizer thing going on. And it's just kind of trying to just take the new technology of the day, I think, and trying to do something different with it.
What's it supposed to be about? I've always struggled with this with Bowie, and I respect him much more now that he's gone, and I've gone back and tried to, and I can see in Bowie a lot of it is about the possibilities for self reinvention in urban life.
Yeah.
What I've never really understood about Bowie is that there's a kind of distance, I think, between himself and his song, because he's singing through a character, and there's this distance here, and then sometimes, like later on, I think that just becomes really cynical, where he gets involved with Nile Rodgers just because he wants to have hits. And even that is like an intellectual exercise. As an intellectual exercise, what would it be like to make music that
How How do you know that Nile Rodgers didn't say to David Bowie, David, I'd love to work with you?
Because I've seen Nile Rodgers interviewed about it, and Bowie got in touch with him and said, I want you to do what you always do. And Nile Rodgers said, what's that? And Bowie said, have hits.
Yeah.
It's so simple.
I don't really understand there's this distance between Bowie and his material that I struggle with. And Roxy Music, I just don't know what it's all about.
I've got no explanations to offer, really. I thought I didn't expect
to come in search of knowledge.
All these sacred cows in my musical collection slaughtered in front of my eyes. I came on here to talk about Sunderland.
Don't worry, mate. I'm on your side. I'm on your side. You see, the only reason
he's like Gilbert O'Sullivan telling me to get down. That's what he does all the time.
Well,
as if he's talking to a dog, as Gilbert O'Sullivan was.
Gilbert O'Sullivan is number 8 in the charts, getting down. You see, if he was a Black American guy saying "get down," you'd be up for it, wouldn't you? You'd be up for it. So let me just go back to what you did with the hot chocolate reference. Once you mentioned Norman Whitfield, I knew at that point I could not go for little Jimmy Osmond singing Tweedledee, oh Tweedledee as the one record in the top 10 that I remember very well.
Even that is back to the 50s. It's like, of course, Sweet and Wizard is back to the 50s.
Laverne Baker, who did the original, as I understand it, of Tweedledee, she is a young Black girl, teenager at the time, from the gospel tradition. So it's like I know it sounds a bit funny, but it's like a gospel tune, but for Sunday school, for kids, if you like. Tweedledee, oh Tweedledum. You can almost hear that Jesus Christ, whatever it might be. Honestly, the way that she sings it, it's like that. And she tears the heart out of it. It's one of those great young Black teenage.
It's like it's got the freshness of Frankie Lyman about it, isn't it?
I was thinking of Lulu because they inspired Lulu. I mean, the Laverne Bakers of this world inspired Lulu, and maybe even to a certain extent, although Lulu had come out about that time, I was thinking of My Boy Lollipop, Millie Small. It's part of that same young Black teenager shouter tradition that they do so well. Little Jimmy Osmond, newest kid on the block, first tune, I Want to Be Your Long-Haired Lover from Liverpool, or whatever it was, got to number 1 for ages and ages and ages. Sweet little boy, needed a slap on the face, but I'm not a violent guy, so I didn't give it to him. Because he was just so cute, He was I'm little Jimmy Osmond. Yeah, I'm little Jimmy Osmond, Donny's younger brother, the one with the long hair, singing about Liverpool and doing all of that. Anyway, David Cassidy, the king of the pop era at that time, along with the Osmonds, is at number 10 with I'm a Clown, Some Kind of Summer. Different departure for him. Back to Roxy Music.
There's an elephant in the room. I think we've got to talk about it.
Okay, let me just say this final thing about Roxy Music that you don't get.
Go on, please. I come in search of knowledge.
You know Talking Heads?
I do.
David Byrne.
Mm-hmm.
He can't sing either.
True.
You do what you do, and the style of your songs suits your capabilities. Mm-hmm. That is the case for all singers, including Aretha Franklin. It's just that these vocalists are a lot more limited. And I do totally accept that Brian Ferry cannot sing a note. Or could not in those days.
Yeah, I know that kind of Avalon stuff from the early 80s is it's so well produced and it's quite slick and it works for me as kind of pop music. But the kind of art school concepts I've never got. But anyway, there's an elephant in the room and people probably won't want us to talk about him, but I think we should. And that's the record at number 2.
Yeah, I thought you'd mention that. Well, Gary Glitter, it's not that nobody wants to talk about him, but he has expunged himself from the mainstream of pop history now because it brings back bitter memories. And when you hear these things, you feel like I was duped along the way. I was one of the younger people that could say that I was duped by this. He says, hello, I'm back again.
Well, he was number 2. He was a big star. Huge. When he was a massive star. And this is him at his biggest.
Well, this tune actually is not him at his biggest because he's just come off the back of a long Australian tour. So he's been off the center of the pop charts now for 4 months at the very least. So he writes a song saying, hello, hello, I'm back again. Do you still want to be part of my gang, my gang, my gang? That was his highest point. I'm the leader of the gang, I am, oh yeah, and all of that. But it was a great concept. I'm not getting it wrong. It was a great concept, mostly by Trevor Horn, who was the Glitter Band's Svengali, bass player for them, but also the great producer that went on to produce the likes of Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Funny enough, he never mentions his Glitter Band days. I've interviewed him twice, I think, and he's never, and I've thought it was a little bit unnecessary to bring that up because it's difficult for him. Imagine all those tunes that he wrote for the Glitter Band, including Rock and Roll, Boom, Rock and Roll, where he used to get royalties every time an American baseball team or hit a home run, because they play that at the stadium. It was like, ba, 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 hey! All the American baseball fans would be shouting, hey, at that point. That was their tune, and they don't do it anymore.
I mean, Gary Glitter's offences are obviously monstrous, but you can't do a Stalin and rub out his musical legacy, because he was a big star.
Why not?
Because he was a big star, and that also had an influence on lots of others. I mean, even your beloved Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. There's Gary Glitter all over it.
No need to go there, Tim. But thank you for that. I'm sorry, Andy. It's a recurring diss of Tim's against me. But
it's the moment when I found out my idol has feet of clay.
I'll live with it. But Tim, you're right. You can't erase history, but for our generation, for our times, he's been erased for now. In 100 years' time, when they look back on these charts and it doesn't have the same
why do you think he was such a big star? And for someone who was overweight and obviously a little bit strange, camp, yeah, it's a very camp time, isn't it?
Well, camp was the order of the outfits that he wore. Impossible high heels that he couldn't actually move on. Also, in answer to your question, at the beginning of the 1970s, there was this little kind of look back to the more innocent, quote unquote, innocent days of the 1950s in the music.
Oh, what irony!
Time. Yeah. So in 1973, the heyday of rock and roll was only 14, 15 years ago.
That pace of change.
Not a long time ago. But actually, in my head, as like a 12-year-old in North London, it was actually a long time ago. This is a completely different thing. So we had missed out on the trajectory of all of those 50s songs. Always, when you see these sort of youth, in those days at least, it's maybe more organic now, but when you saw those youth cults just emerge, you would know that a record company had been behind it. Not that the youth cult didn't precede the record company's intervention, but it was the record companies had all these guys going around to youth clubs, seeing what the kids were doing, what they were wearing, and all this kind of thing.
And this is also the Slade era, isn't it?
Exactly.
Slade, they've got one going down the charts. But one of the things that
just jump in. The rock and roll thing. I mean, it was a big cultural thing in '73, wasn't it? Because wasn't that the year when Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis played Wembley Stadium?
You're absolutely right. I was there. I was there at Wembley Stadium.
And American Graffiti was '73 as well, wasn't it? So it was 100%. Kind of that retro thing was in the air that year.
Yeah. I can't believe you knew all that as a 10-month-old, because I was like 13 and I barely remember it. No, but you're absolutely right. First of all, huge concert at Wembley Stadium. And by then, the rockers were like long-haired hippies with flared jeans. It was funny. It was weird because I expected it to be full of Teddy boys. But, there weren't the Teds there and everything, because Joe Lee Lewis, Chuck Berry and Little Richard, the three biggest names of rock and roll alive at that point, were there. Oh, well, apart from Elvis Presley, obviously, were there. And it was kind of like more of a kind of a festival today, but it was only one day at Wembley Stadium. 100,000 people or more there, 100,000 people at this match on May the 5th. Sunday, Saturday, May the 5th, 1973. 100,000 people at Wembley. That's a lot of people. And Sunderland are there in effect with filling up half of the stadium. That's how many people marched all the way down from the northeast to go to Wembley to see this match, or the northwest, actually, because this was a battle of the northwest versus the northeast in many ways, wasn't it? Yeah. Anyway, going back to the charts at that time.
Yeah, so the point I want to make on Slade was that when they first came out, the fella behind them was Chaz Chandler, you know, the Animals bassist who'd been behind the look of Jimi Hendrix. And he was a fella who said to Jimi Hendrix, look, go and dress. Sergeant Pepper is just coming out. Go and dress like you're a member of Sergeant Pepper. You know? So he's one of those with his with his finger close to what's going on. But he launches Slade as a skinhead band.
Yeah, indeed. Ambrosia Slade.
Yeah,
Ambrosia Slade was.
And they were skinheads. And then you obviously see the pace of change because you know, Noddy Holder and Dave Hill by this time were emphatically not skinheads.
Well, they left the sideburns because remember, as well as having crew cuts, they had big sideburns. That was one of the sort of motifs of, you know, the more serious older skinheads, the ones that weren't teenagers anymore. They had really big, thicker sideburns. So they left the sideburns, but they grew their hair long and then wore sort of clown outfits, or at least Noddy Holder did, clown outfits to sell their music. Also in the charts, Sweet from that era are at number 4 with Hellraiser, one of their big hits. So you see it goes straight into the charts at number 4, which wasn't an easy thing to do in those days. Mud from that era are in there. But what I want to talk about
is Judge Dredd.
Of course it is. I was going to talk about the 12th of Never with Donny Osmond, because I know you wanted to talk about that.
No, please. Save that one for the 11th of Never. We'll get there.
Oh, I get it. And also, I was possibly going to talk, and you love this one as well, Tim. Good Grief, Christina! How come you never heard of rock and roll by Chicory Tip? But I know that you want me to talk about Judge Dredd. Andy, have you any idea who Judge Dredd was?
I just had this knowledge that Judge Dredd made these singles that were banned by Radio 1.
That's exactly right.
And that was all I knew. But what I did find out recently was that, which I hadn't known, was that they were put out by Trojan Records.
They were, 100%.
I watched the Trojan documentary recently on Sky Arts that came out last year, I think, and I had no idea whatsoever it was a Trojan thing. But I'd never actually heard any of them because obviously they'd been banned when I was a kid. And then I just never got around to listen to them on YouTube. But all the weird cultural thing at the time,
Well, reggae was really big at the time on an underground level. So whilst the mainstream was looking back to the 1950s for a revival of rock and roll, on the street level, all the music was coming from Jamaica. And Trojan was the biggest of those companies here in the UK at the time. What they did generally was just license music directly from Jamaica through producers, and the producers were people who just went around, gave some street kid 30 quid and said, you know, voice this vocal, but the kid would have no royalties. You know, the producer, he wouldn't even know about royalties. The producer would just then use that music and license it to English record labels. What they did with Judge Dredd, because there is this aspect of reggae culture, which is the instrumental, they call it the dub version, which was always on the flip side of a record. So the producer saved himself money by going into a studio and hiring a group of session musicians to play a rhythm and getting a young kid to voice it and paying that young kid 30 quid. He saved himself the money of doing it twice in the days when there were two sides to a 7-inch and an LP, by just taking out the vocals and then putting the instrumental version on the B side. And this became a thing. Actually, we were getting duped as record. I remember when I first got into reggae, I was like thinking, hang on, you know, the rock and roll records, you get 2 tracks for the same money as you do with the reggae songs, which is 1 track. You get the instrumental version on one side and the vocal version on the other side. Anyway, Judge Dredd was a bouncer, an East End bouncer. The really interesting thing about this is culturally, remember, this is music rejected even by the Jamaican establishment. So it was rebel music coming from Jamaica and finding a multicultural audience in the UK. So that there were white guys buying that Trojan Records. Trojan was really the Motown of the UK at that time. And it broke the barriers of, certainly in in metropolises, so in cities, big cities where there were larger immigrant communities. It broke down the racial divide, if there ever was one, because I tend to think in the communities I grew up in, they were artificial, those racial divides brought in by other people. We as kids, you know, we just played with each other and just went about it. There's a little bit argy-bargy, this and that, and a few sort of like racial slurs coming into it, but it's like innocent kids picking up nonsense from other people and throwing it in the mix, and then you just like punch each other in the eye and you get on with it and start playing football together again. But at that time,
it's a Richie Pitt approach to life, isn't it?
Exactly. That's exactly it. You know, make them know. I can't remember the phrase that you used earlier on, Andy, but make them know that you're there.
Yeah. Put a marker down. Yeah.
Exactly. Put a marker down. Put your marker down. Anyway, just to cut this long story short, what they did with Judge Dredd, he was a bouncer from the East End. Not unusual that a bouncer or any big white guy, and he's a big, huge white guy, could be into reggae and finding the humor in reggae. So he was essentially what we would call a toaster nowadays, or an MC or a rapper, if you like. And he just talked and he told these nursery rhyme stories. And I, no offense, folks, but Judge Dredd is not banned as such from the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, but if you know, you're likely to be offended by what comes next, look away now. So his big hits they're always called Big One. Do you get it? Big One. Big Two. Do you get it? Big Two. And after the parts of the anatomy had been exhausted, then it was like, I had to find ways to explain this is Big Three, Big Four, Big Five, Big Six, Big Seven, Big Eight. I think with Big Eight, he went back to the anatomy for some reason. But anyway, his tunes, the ones that I remember, you could only hear them, like you say, they were banned on radio. So where were you going to hear them? You could hear them at the youth club if the vicar wasn't around. But you laugh, but true. But you'd hear. I used to hear them going to Petticoat Lane Market in the East End on a Sunday, and they used to have stalls that sold records. There'd be some specialist sort of Caribbean music stalls, reggae music stalls, and you'd always hear on a Sunday, white pussy, black pussy, pink pussy, blue. The name of the game is Little Boy Blue. Bye. That was Judge Dredd. I didn't know what a pussy was in those days. I was only like 8 years
singing about
old.
a cat.
Yeah, of course. You are the black cats, obviously. Don't cross my path. But yeah, I hope that.
Did you know he was white?
I can't remember. That's
he was English and white. You know.
I think I knew he was English because, funny enough, I don't think black and white was such well, amongst us, it wasn't like a thing when you were talking about artists. Mm-hmm. You know, did you know that, you may have asked me, you know, did I know that Geordie were black or white, or Hot Chocolate were black or white or whatever? You know, I don't think it was good. But that's a really good question. I'll think about that and I might come back to you on that on a later date.
I guess with that, you kind of wouldn't know because you would only know if they appeared on Top of the Pops.
Yeah,
what they look like, sort of thing. And
he
Judge Dredd wasn't going to be on Top of the Pops.
Yeah.
But also the majority of the Trojan acts were in Jamaica and they weren't coming across to do Top of the Pops either. So you didn't really
funny enough, some of them were. They
right.
brought over people that became sort of almost, I mean, Dennis Al Capone, for example, was just, you know, you would have thought like a relatively minor Jamaican DJ, but he moved here lock, stock and barrel. And a few of them did actually. So Ansel Collins for a while, David Ansel Collins, who was based over here, Trojan again, I'm pretty sure on that. Dandy Livingston, he moved over here as well. He was more here than in Jamaica, but great Jamaican artist by the way. Suzanne, beware of the devil. They'd always say, the Jamaican guys would say a V as a B. So it was Suzanne, beware of the devil. Don't let him break your heart. Anyway, it's funny. It was great times. Honestly, this is my era of music. And I know Tim doesn't like the pop stuff, but you and I know, Andy, it was there for a reason. It was there for us to remember all these songs as it is now. Almost 50 years later, 48 years later. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine? We're talking about a game 48 years ago, Andy, and we're talking about it as if it's still part of our DNA, and I'm sure many football supporters' DNA as well. Can you imagine, nearly half a century? Imagine talking about a game like when I was growing up from the 1920s. You know, it just, it's crazy, isn't it?
I can't think of that many games from around then that are still discussed. Obviously, I'm biased because I'm a Sunderland fan, so it's part of the culture of being a Sunderland fan. But it does get mentioned and hark back to a hell of a lot for a game that was 50 years ago. And I can't think of that many other cup finals almost that still get talked about from that decade. So it was a one-off, I think.
Yeah, it just goes to show, Tim, and like Andy's saying there, just to wrap up this conversation, just goes to show that these great football matches have a way of living on forever. I genuinely believe that this is one of the best FA Cup finals ever, certainly in my lifetime. But I wouldn't have imagined in 1973 that I'd be talking about it 48 years later. Why does it still resonate for you?
Well, probably because Sunderland have underachieved since. And imagine, had they won stuff, then 70, and it's the reason that England talk about 1966, because there's been nothing since. So it still stands out as a fantastic upset, or upheaval, as Brian Moore keeps referring to it in the commentary. You know, he uses it again and again and again. He calls it an upheaval. But well done to Sunderland for causing this upheaval.
Andy, where can people hear more from you? You've got a podcast, amongst other things.
Yeah, I got a couple of podcasts. I do Atletico Mince with Bob Mortimer. We do those semi-regularly, and I do Top Flight Time Machine with Sam Delaney, which originally started out as a fortnightly look back at old Premier League seasons, and it's now become a 5 times a week podcast, which has got very little to do with football whatsoever, but it's retained the name. So we do loads of them. And I do a podcast with my son as well called Beans on Toast, which I should big up. He's DJ
That's Beans with a Z, isn't it?
Toast. It's no Beans with an S.
With a Z?
Not with a Z. That might be a different one. That might be a rival podcast.
No, I was thinking Beans means Heinz, doesn't it?
Beans means Heinz. We're not affiliated with Heinz. other beans are available. So yeah, I do them. One other thing I wanted to mention quickly about the 73 Cup final was the day after when they came back with the trophy, and there was about 10 miles of the streets being lined with fans, and they made their way. It took about 3 hours, I think, for the bus to get to Roker Park, and Roker Park itself was full. So they did the lap of honour around Roker Park, but there was a fantastic thing that happened. Someone, don't know how this was authorised by the club or whatever, but a white coffin appeared that was carried around by some fellas, and there was a bloke dressed as a priest, and they carried it around the perimeter of the Roker Park pitch, and it was a coffin, and on the side it had written, Leeds, died 1973. So that, you can see the footage of that on YouTube if you seek it out. That's just, again, something that would never happen in 2021, but there it is, part of history.
Thank you very much, Andy. Tim, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Cheers. Thanks.
What an excellent podcast, Andy. Can't thank you enough for that one.